Welcome to another deep dive, and this time we're going to tackle a figure shrouded in mystery and intrigue, Hasan Sabbah. Uh, from what I've read about this guy, it's like something straight out of an action movie.
It's definitely a story that's captured imaginations for centuries. Lots of embellishment and, frankly, distortion along the way.
Right, so we've got our work cut out for us. We're going to try to separate fact from fiction using some excerpts from historical texts and, as always, some of your save notes to guide us.
Yeah, I think together we can really paint a clearer picture of Hasan Sabbah, his motivations, his impact, and how he managed to build this movement that, well, challenged a powerful empire.
Okay, so the first thing we got to do is establish some basics. Who was Hasan Sabbah? Where's his story even begin?
Well, he was born in the mid-1050s CE in Qom, Persia, to a Twelver Shi'i family.
Okay, so Shi'i Muslim background. Got it.
They later moved to Ray, which at the time was a real center for Ismaili activities.
Hold on, rewind a bit. Ismaili, wasn't he Twelver Shi'i?
Right, so his family was, but in his late teens, he met Amira Zarab, who was an Ismaili Dai.
A Dai.
Yeah, a Dai is basically a religious figure who spreads the teachings of Ismailism. Think of them like, I guess, ambassadors of faith, going out there and sharing their knowledge.
Okay, so this Amira Zarab, this Dai, really had a profound impact on him, huh?
Absolutely. He went on to study under other Dais, like
Right.
Abu Nasr Siraj. And at the age of 17, Hasan Sabbah converted to Ismailism. And in 1072 CE, he pledged allegiance to the Fatimid Caliph al-Mustansir, who was in Cairo.
Wow, that's a pretty significant shift from his upbringing. Do we know what specifically drew him to Ismailism?
You know, the sources don't really get into the nitty-gritty of his personal reasons, but we do know that Ray was a major hub for Ismaili thought at the time. So he was probably exposed to these ideas from a young age, which might have planted the seeds, so to speak.
Fascinating. Okay, so we have a young Hasan Sabbah, obviously bright guy, clearly drawn to these Ismaili teachings. What happens next? Does he become like a scholar, or is there more to it?
There's definitely more to it. He wasn't content with just learning. He really wanted to put that knowledge to work. And he ended up impressing Abd al-Malik bi Atash, who was like this top Ismaili Dai in the region.
So like a mentor or...
Yeah, you could say that. Abd al-Malik bi Atash saw his potential and recruited him to the Ismaili Dawah.
Hold on, Dawa? Like another kind of Dai?
No, the Dawah, it's their mission organization. Like, they were tasked with spreading the faith.
Got it. Okay, so he joins this Dawa. What kind of missions was he on?
Well, his first stop was Isfahan in 1074 CE, which was like a secret headquarters for the Dawah in Persia.
Ah, working undercover. I see where this is going.
And then Ibn Atash sent him to Cairo in 1076 CE for further education. Imagine that, traveling all that way just for knowledge.
Wow, dedicated, for sure. Egypt was like the heart of the Fatimid Caliphate, right?
It was, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. He spent 3 years there, between Cairo and Alexandria, and it seems that he even clashed with the Fatimid vizier, Badr al-Jamali.
Uh-oh, trouble already. What was that about?
You know, the sources are kind of vague on the specifics, but this disagreement ultimately led to his expulsion from Egypt in 1081 CE.
Banished. Wow, you think he'd lay low for a while, but knowing what we know about Hasan Sabbah, I'm guessing that's not what happened.
You're right. Instead, he returns to Persia and starts traveling extensively. He was probably still working with the Dawah, but he was also, you know, taking in the political landscape. And remember, this is the time of the Saljuq Turks. They were a powerful Sunni dynasty, and he's a Shi'i Ismaili.
Yeah, that's bound to create some tension, especially with what you mentioned earlier about the Saljuqs keeping a close eye on the Dawah.
Exactly, and this is where I think Hasan Sabbah's strategic mind really comes into play. He realized that if the Ismailis wanted to thrive, they needed their own space, free from Saljuq influence.
And that's what leads him to Delhi, right? I've got some notes here on that. A Shi'i stronghold, far from Saljuq control. Was that for safety?
Safety, yeah, but also strategy. Dalem's distance from Saljuq power centers and its strong Shi'i identity made it the perfect place to start building an independent Ismaili movement.
So he wasn't just running away, he was planning something bigger. And of course, within Dalim, there's one place that becomes central to his story, Alamut. Tell me about that.
Alamut was this incredible fortress, high in the Elburz Mountains in the Red Bar region. nearly inaccessible natural defenses, really, like something out of a movie.
Sounds epic.
Yeah, it was. Around 1087 CE, Hasan Sabbah sets his sights on Alamut. And through, a combination of cunning and careful planning, he takes control of the fortress in 1090 CE.
This is the turning point, isn't it?
Absolutely. The capture of Alamut marks the birth of the Nizari Ismaili state of Persia.
Wow. So this wasn't just about taking over a fortress, it was a statement.
Right. A symbol of defiance. It was like he was saying, the Ismailis are here to stay.
And he wastes no time in turning Alamut into a stronghold. But what's interesting is that he also establishes a major library there. That's not exactly what you'd expect from, a military leader.
Well, this is where I think Hasan Sabbah's foresight really shines. He understood that knowledge was power. By establishing a library, he was investing in the intellectual development of his community.
So it wasn't just about physical strength, it was about mental strength as well.
Right. You could say he was fostering this culture of learning that would make them more resilient in the long run.
So he's fortifying Alamut, building up its defenses, creating a center for knowledge. What's his next move? Does he just, hunker down and wait for the Saljuqs to come knocking?
Not a chance. Remember, he's still a Dai at heart, and the mission of the Dawa is still central to his thinking. He wants to spread his message, expand his influence, and that takes him to Kustan.
Kustan, where's that?
It's a region in southeastern Khorasan. He sent a Dai there, Hussein Qaini, in 1091 CE.
Okay, and what was so special about Kustan?
Well, Hussein Qaini ended up sparking a major uprising against the Saljuqs. It was like the Ismaili message really resonated with the people of Kustan, and they rose up against what they perceived as oppression.
So towns are captured, control shifts, and Kustan, alongside Alamut, becomes another key center for the Ismaili movement.
Exactly.
So within 2 years of taking Alamut, he's created not one, but 2 centers of power right under the Saljuqs' noses. That's some serious strategic maneuvering. But I can't imagine the Saljuqs just sat back and watched all this happen.
Oh, they definitely didn't. They weren't happy about it at all. In 1092 CE, they launched major military campaigns against both Alamut and Kustan, trying to put down this rebellion.
Okay, so things are escalating. What happens next? Do the Ismailis manage to hold out against this Saljuq offensive?
Well, just when it seemed like things were really going south for them, a couple of unexpected events completely changed the game.
Our notes actually call this a major turning point. What happened?
In 1092 CE, the powerful Saljuq vizier, Nizam al-Mulk, was assassinated. And shortly after that, Sultan Malik Shah himself died.
Wow.
Yeah, it threw the Saljuq Sultanate into total chaos, with rivalries and power struggles popping up everywhere. And their campaigns against the Ismailis basically ground to a halt.
And I bet Hasan Sabbah saw this as a golden opportunity, am I right?
You are. He was a master of exploiting opportunities. With the Saljuqs distracted, he consolidated his power in Rudbar. He captured Lamasar, which is this strategically important fortress west of Alamut, and Ismaili influence spread even further. They gained control of Girdku near Demgan and a bunch of other fortresses in Arajan, which is on the border of Khuzestan and Fars.
So it's not just about holding on to Alamut anymore. He's actively expanding his territory.
Exactly.
Smart. But there's this other side to Hasan Sabbah and his strategy that's become pretty infamous.
You're talking about the assassinations.
Right. It's almost synonymous with his name. Did he really have this network of assassins taking out his enemies?
Well, targeted assassinations definitely became part of his strategy. But to be fair, this wasn't something he invented.
Yeah, I was just thinking, it sounds dramatic, but...
It was a tactic used by lots of groups during this period, often in response to, the brutality of medieval warfare.
So as shocking as it might sound to us, it was, I guess, kind of a common tactic back then.
Sadly, yes. And in the context of Hasan Sabbah's struggle, it was aimed at specific targets, usually military and political leaders who posed a direct threat to the Ismailis.
A calculated move, then, not just some random reign of terror.
Exactly.
I see. It was a dangerous game, but I guess he felt it was necessary to protect his people, to protect his fledgling state. But amidst all this conflict and all this political maneuvering, there's also this deeper, more philosophical side to Hasan Sabbah and his movement that often gets overlooked.
Absolutely. And that brings us to, the Nizari-Musta'li schism and the doctrine of Talim, which really gets to the heart of what made Hasan Sabbah and his followers unique.
Okay. The Nizari-Musta'li schism and Talim. This is where things get really interesting. What happened here, and how did it shape Hasan Sabbah's movement?
Well, in 1094 CE, the Fatimid Caliph, Al-Mustansir, he
Ah,
died, and he had named his eldest son Nizar as his successor.
okay.
But when the caliph died, a power struggle broke out, and Nizar was denied the caliphate. His younger brother was installed instead.
Wow. So that caused a major rift in the Ismaili community.
It did, big time. You had those who supported Nizar and those who supported his brother.
And I'm guessing Hasan Sabbah sided with Nizar.
You guessed right.
Yeah.
He believed that Nizar was the rightful heir, and this decision led him to, well, break away from the Fatimids in Cairo.
So he's defying the Saljuqs, and now he's separated from the main Ismaili community in Egypt. Talk about an uphill battle.
That's an understatement, but this is where Talim comes in.
Okay, so remind me again, Talim, what does that mean?
Taliman. It means authoritative instruction. It emphasizes the need for a divinely appointed teacher to guide the community. This teacher is called the Mu'allim Sadiq.
So it's not just about, like, having faith. It's about having a teacher who can, I guess, explain it all.
Right. Hasan Sabbah argued that human reason alone wasn't enough to really understand the divine mysteries. He believed that people needed a Mu'allim Sadiq to guide them to, spiritual enlightenment.
And for the Nizaris, that Mu'allim Sadiq was the Ismaili Imam, right? But with Nizar dead, assassinated in Cairo, wasn't that a problem for Hasan Sabbah?
It was, but it also kind of created an opportunity. See, without a living imam, Hasan Sabbah stepped into the role of Hujjah.
Hujjah, another new term.
The Hujjah is the highest representative of the hidden imam. So essentially, he becomes both the spiritual and political leader of the Nizari Ismailis.
Okay, so he's leading a rebellion, building a state, and now he's also guiding this religious community. A lot on his plate. Did this change the way he led?
Oh, yeah. It solidified his authority and gave him a platform to, well, really articulate his vision for an independent Nizari community based on the principles of Talim. He emphasized knowledge, reason. He wanted his followers to seek understanding through education, critical thinking, all that.
Ah, okay, that makes sense. Explains the library at Alamut. He wasn't just creating a fortress. He was creating a center for, like, intellectual and spiritual growth.
Exactly. A strong community needed more than just military might, right? They needed a strong foundation of knowledge and faith. And Talim provided that framework.
So Hasan Sabbah breaks with the Fatimids, embraces Talim, and basically becomes both spiritual and political leader. What about the Saljuqs? They're still out there.
Oh, yeah. And in fact, the Saljuq Sultanate was starting to stabilize after the deaths of Nizam al-Mulk and Malik Shah, and they turned their attention back to the Ismailis. So during Barkyaruq's reign from 1094 to 1105 CE, the Ismailis managed to capture another important fortress, Shadiz.
Where's that one?
It was strategically important, and it really alarmed the Saljuqs. So much so that Barkyaruq and his brother Senjar, they made a pact to try to contain Ismaili influence.
Contain. Sounds ominous. So did this pact actually lead to more fighting?
Oh, yeah. And it escalated under Barkyaruq's successor, Muhammad Tapar. He came to power in 1105 CE and launched a full-on offensive against Alamut in 1109 CE.
Wow, going straight for the heart of it. That must have been a real test for Hasan Sabbah's leadership.
It was. Think about it. You're under siege, constantly threatened by a powerful enemy, and at the same time, you're trying to, build this new society based on your ideals.
Intense. So did they withstand the attack?
They did, believe it or not. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, the Nizaris successfully defended Alamut. They repelled Muhammad Tapar's forces, forcing him to withdraw.
Whoa. How'd they pull that off?
Well, their location helped, obviously. The mountains provided natural defenses. Yeah. But they also had a highly organized system of intelligence gathering and communication. Remember the Dawa network we talked about?
Right. The Da'is, who were spreading the Ismaili message, they were doing more than just, preaching, huh?
Oh, yeah, much more. They were gathering intel on enemy movements, identifying threats, coordinating defenses. They were like a secret intelligence agency.
So the Da'is, the ambassadors of faith, were also spies. That's amazing. Like a medieval spy network. So they had intel, a strong fortress. And I'm guessing they were pretty good fighters, too.
Oh, yeah, they were. They were masters of mountain warfare. They knew how to fight in close quarters, how to use surprise attacks, ambushes, and they were experts at, exploiting their enemies' weaknesses.
And, of course, they also used the tactic they became infamous for, the assassination.
Right. The Nizaris used targeted assassinations as a strategic tool. It's important to remember that they were facing this much larger enemy, and they couldn't fight them head-on, not on a large scale.
So assassinations were a way to, disrupt the Saljuqs?
Right. Disrupt their command structure, create fear, maybe even deter future attacks.
A calculated risk, then. It's definitely a controversial tactic, but I can see how, in their situation, it might have seemed necessary. But beyond, military tactics and all that, there's also this underlying philosophy of Talim that shaped the Nizaris, made them so
Yes,
resilient.
exactly. Their commitment to knowledge, to critical thinking, to spiritual growth, it all fostered this incredible sense of unity and purpose. It wasn't just about following orders, it was about understanding why.
So it was more than just a fight for land. It was a fight for an idea.
Yeah, for a way of life.
Now, all this is happening in Persia. But our notes also mention Nizari activity in Syria. Did Hasan Sabbah's movement actually spread beyond Persia's borders?
It did. In the early 12th century, he starts sending dais to Syria to spread the Nizari message.
So this is international.
Syria was strategically important, you see. It was on the edge of the Fatimid Caliphate and had a diverse population, including quite a few Ismailis.
Okay. Was this expansion successful?
Very much so. Over time, the Nigers in Syria established their own strongholds and became a major force in the region. Much like their counterparts in Persia, their organizational skills, combined with the principles of Talim, really allowed them to adapt.
It's amazing how this community, starting from a mountain fortress in Persia, managed to, spread its influence so far.
Yeah.
They were facing empires, creating their own space in the world.
It's a testament to their resilience, to their strategic brilliance, and to the power of their beliefs.
And it all started with Hasan Sabbah, this guy who challenged the status quo and really created something new.
He was remarkable, really, a mix of pragmatism and idealism, a brilliant strategist, and a charismatic leader.
But, we can't just talk about strategy and expansion. We have to talk about the man himself, Hasan Sabbah, the person. And some of the stories about his personal life are, well, they're pretty shocking, especially about his family.
Yeah. The stories about him ordering the execution of his own sons, one for allegedly murdering somebody and the other for, supposedly drinking wine.
And then there's that story about him sending his wife and daughters to live at the fortress of Gurdku. It all makes him sound, well, kind of ruthless, like a tyrant.
I get it. But remember, we're looking at these events through a modern lens. Back then, things were different, Their ideas of justice and punishment were different. And the authority of a leader, especially in a community like this, facing constant threats, it was often absolute.
So while those actions seem extreme to us today, they might have been seen as, well, necessary, at least back then.
Maybe even justified. It's not about condoning them, but trying to understand them. And there are other accounts of Hasan Sabbah that paint him in a more, positive light. As a devout and scholarly man, a charismatic leader, the truth is probably somewhere in between.
So it sounds like we're dealing with someone who, well, defies categorization, a man of contradictions, ruthless and visionary, pragmatic and idealistic. He was a product of his time, but he also transcended those times.
For sure. He raises all sorts of questions about leadership, about faith, about the things we do for what we believe in, questions that are, still relevant today.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The Dawah, Alamut, the Nizari-Musta'li schism, the expansion into Syria, and the challenges Hasan Sabbah faced, externally and within his community. What are your final thoughts on his legacy? How should we remember him?
I think he was a remarkable figure. He defied expectations and built a movement that challenged these massive empires. He was a brilliant strategist, a charismatic leader, and a man who deeply believed in knowledge in a just society. But he was also, complex and controversial. He did things that make us question the nature of power, faith, and the choices we make when things get tough.
And maybe those questions are the most important part of his legacy. They force us to think critically about our own beliefs, about the things we do in the name of those beliefs.
Right. His story is a reminder that history is not always about simple answers. It's about wrestling with complexity, with nuance, with the fact that people are messy.
Okay, well, we're running out of time for today's deep dive, but we still have so much more to discuss, so join us next time when we explore the downfall of Alamut and what happened to the Nizari Ismailis after Hasan Sabbah. It's fascinating how Hasan Sabbah's story, it challenges so many of our preconceived notions. We hear assassins, and we picture, these shadowy figures lurking in the mountains, but the reality of the Nizari Ismailis is so much more complex than that.
Absolutely. Even that term assassin, it's loaded with misconceptions. It's been used to, demonize them, dehumanize them.
Yeah.
It comes from this Arabic word hashishin, which some people interpreted as like hashish eaters,
Right.
a label their enemies used to basically paint them as drug-crazed fanatics. But there's no evidence to support that claim.
So, like, it was propaganda.
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow.
A way to discredit them, to justify violence against them.
So when we dig a little deeper, we see that the Nizaris were actually, well, pretty sophisticated.
They were.
Yeah.
A diverse community with a rich intellectual tradition. And a lot of that comes from Hasan Sabbah's emphasis on knowledge and talim.
It's amazing how this community, facing persecution, this constant military pressure, managed to not only survive, but thrive for, like, what, over a century and a half?
Yeah, their resilience is incredible. They were this minority group in a hostile environment, and their survival depended on their ability to adapt, to think strategically, to defend themselves.
Right.
They built these fortresses, they cultivated alliances, gathered intelligence, and they even used those targeted assassinations when they felt it was necessary. But it was all driven by this deep commitment to their faith and their desire to create a just society.
It's a reminder that sometimes even the most controversial actions, we can understand them a little better when we think about the context.
Exactly. It's not about like condoning or condemning. It's about understanding.
Yeah.
And when we do that, when we try to understand the Nizaris on their own terms, we see that they were much more than just some shadowy group of assassins. They were people trying to live their faith, protect their families, and build a better world.
So how'd they do it? How did this community, outnumbered, outgunned, manage to hold their own against these massive empires?
Well, part of it was their choice of location, right? They established these strongholds in, remote mountainous regions like Alamut.
Yeah.
Natural fortresses, basically.
Yeah, those mountains really played a key role.
Mm-hmm.
But it couldn't have just been about hiding out.
No, you're right. They were masters of strategy and intelligence gathering, that network of dais, remember?
Right.
It wasn't just about spreading the faith. It was a vital source of information. They could anticipate enemy movements, assess threats, and coordinate their defenses.
So the dais, they were the eyes and ears of the community.
Exactly. And that gave them a huge advantage. They couldn't match the Saljuqs in terms of raw military power, so they had to outsmart them.
And they were adaptable in their military tactics too, right?
Oh, yeah. Masters of mountain fighting used the terrain to their advantage. Surprise attacks, ambushes, lightning raids always kept their enemies guessing.
And of course, the assassinations.
Right. It was controversial, no doubt, but it was calculated, and it seems to have worked, at least to some extent.
Well, it's a good reminder that history is messy. The choices people made back then, they weren't always clear-cut.
It wasn't black and white. We have to be careful not to judge them too harshly based on, our standards today.
Right.
The Nizaris were fighting for their survival. They used the means they had available to them.
But it wasn't just about tactics and intelligence, was it? Their strength also came from, their faith, right?
Yeah.
And the bonds within their community.
Absolutely. Their shared beliefs, their sense of purpose, their willingness to sacrifice for each other, it gave them incredible strength. It wasn't just about land, it was about an idea, a way of life.
And that made them a force to be reckoned with.
No doubt about it.
Their story, it's a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from military might, but from the unity, the determination of a community.
Yeah. It's that human element that so often gets overlooked. We get caught up in the battles and the leaders and the politics. But what really shapes history is the people, their beliefs, their hopes, their struggles.
And in the case of the Nizari Ismailis, those struggles were tied to their faith, their community, their desire for a better world. Their story challenges us to look beyond those stereotypes, beyond those easy answers, and to really appreciate, the courage and resilience of those who came before us.
Beautifully said. And maybe the most important lesson we can take from this deep dive is that history, it's not just about the past. It's about understanding the forces that shaped our present, and recognizing that the choices we make today, they'll shape the world for generations to come. So what will your legacy be?
That is a great question. And a perfect note to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Hasan Sabbah and the rise of Alamut. We hope you've enjoyed this journey into the past and that you'll keep exploring the complexities of history with an open mind and, a thirst for knowledge.